everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Impact and Importance of Rack Price Intelligence. My name is Shannon Folken, and I am part of the energy marketing team here at DTN. And before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to run through just a few housekeeping items. First, you'll notice that everyone is muted, and that just helps reduce background noise, but we do encourage you to ask questions, as there will be time at the end to answer those. Please type your questions into the Q&A window that can be found in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We'll get to as many as we can in the time we have allotted, and any remaining we will answer via email after the webinar. Additionally, we will be sending out an email in a day or two with a link to the rebroadcast, as well as instructions on how you can request a custom rack report. We haven't offered this promotion before, so be sure to take advantage of this opportunity. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brian Milne, who is our editor and senior analyst here at DTN. He's a 26-year veteran of the energy industry, and he's delivered dozens of presentations on a wide range of topics discussing the energy markets and has been quoted widely in the media. He has authored numerous articles for international magazines, exploring market dynamics and providing forward-thinking commentary and analysis. We're incredibly lucky he is a part of our DTN team. So with that, Brian, I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to our discussion this afternoon about buying and selling fuel in the wholesale market. First, let me go over the agenda. We will begin by reviewing market dynamics and then move to a quick history lesson on how pricing has changed over the years. With that background, we will turn to the multiple influences and how refined product prices are determined and the multitude of considerations a pricing manager must consider when setting price. This leads us to a discussion on basis risk and the factors that could lead to this exposure. We then turn to common pricing programs that buyers and sellers use to temper price volatility, preserve margin, and guarantee supply. We'll finish with a discussion on spot to rack arbitrage relationships and why they are important to understand. But first, I am sure certainly everybody knows a lot about the energy, the oil side, the oil flow of things, and that many costs are borne well in advance of the terminal. But this chart gives us a good visual on those steps. And it's to be noted that each leg is critical in the conversion of crude oil from a raw material to a finished usable product, which add costs along each stage of the supply chain. These multiple stages also expose the product to potential disruptions that can and do affect costs. So keep that in mind as we go forward. And now we'll take our little history lesson about as far as how refined fuels were priced previously. When you look back, and we are going a little bit back there in time, but when you look at it, the price setters were refiners. They determined both the spot price and they determined the rack price. Refiners would absorb the costs. They were drilling for the oil and distributing, et cetera, and they would pass these costs downstream. This is also an era where you had price controls, which would end in the 1980s. As we move forward and futures markets were developed for the oil products and crude oil, things started to change. And if you look from the late 1980s to current, things have evolved over that period, but generally the structure is the same. So we break out the two infrastructures, looking at the spot market and the wholesale market, which is of course your rack market. And we can see that the pricing method is off of financials, index financials. We're talking like futures contracts and other settings, whether it be a published price, and we'll get into more of that. The price setter, of course, is the exchanges. Mostly the market is determining the price, and when you have price basis, benchmark basis for spot numbers, and of course postings and benchmarks at the rack level. Now, price discovery in the futures market. So we're looking at right now, anybody with the access to futures quotes can see the price of crude oil wherever you're at. So that is important, and it allows for buyers and sellers to collaborate, to buy fuel or sell fuel. The futures contracts are fungible, meaning that they're interchangeable. So you're getting, when you buy a futures contract, you're getting the same type of oil. Of course, this is a financial transaction, or same type of gasoline, or same type of distillate, or ULSD that would be, that anybody else would through the futures exchange. That's what makes it work. This futures market energy trading was evolutionary, and it allowed the buyers and sellers to see everything at the same time. This forum serves as a critical benchmark in setting product prices across the country, with the futures contract reflecting national and international considerations of supply and demand, macroeconomic forces, and geopolitics. So we'll move now to the spot markets. They are, of course, limitations to what a futures market can determine the fair market value for gasoline, let's say a state like Washington State. When you consider that the RBOB and ULSD futures contracts are geographically tied to the New York Harbor market. So how is this determined? So that's where spot markets come into play. Spot markets are where the actual refined products are physically traded. All commodities have spot markets. For refined fuels, there are 7 major regional spot markets in the United States. They include New York Harbor, as we just mentioned, the Gulf Coast market, Chicago, the Group 3, which is Oklahoma. We have 2 spot markets in California, the Los Angeles market and the San Francisco market, and of course the market in Pacific Northwest, or some might refer to as the Portland market. Now, spot markets are where large bulk transactions take place and are delivered by pipeline or marine vessels. They're delivered to the terminals from these locations. Spot refined fuels markets trade in the basis against the relevant futures contract. So in other words, gasoline would trade against the RBOB futures contract, and diesel, heating oil, and jet fuel would trade against the ULSD futures contract. They will trade against the futures contract nearest to delivery through most of the month, with several markets rolling forward to the second nearest delivered month late in the month. Okay, a lot of months in there, right? But what it's referring to is the futures contract. We always look at the nearest delivered futures contract right until the end, and you'll start seeing it move. Right now, the nearest delivered futures contract is October. When we start getting into like the 22nd, 23rd of the month, you'll start seeing them roll, and some spot markets will start indexing against the November contract. Okay, and the way that you see the trade, and we have that graphic for an illustration. Let's say CBOB. You might look at CBOB in the Houston market for entry in the Colonial Pipeline. Might trade at a 5 cents discount to October RBOB futures, for instance. Or you might have ULSD in the group market trading at a 6 cents premium to the October ULSD futures contract. So that's important to understand. That's the way spot markets trade. They're not trading at a flat price. That's important to know. And the reason for that is you have the futures contracts, which are moving about, and the market considers that all the information for macroeconomics and geopolitics and major events globally are being collected in that futures price. So when you look at the spot market price, that's trading against that in a sliding basis, which can determine whether a market is tight or tight supply or has plenty of supply. That will determine whether the basis is strengthening or weakening. We'll move to rack pricing. And so refined products on the pipelines and barges trading the spot markets will be delivered to distribution terminals, where suppliers will offer product for sale in a posting or posted price, which is known as the rack price. Prices at a wholesale distribution terminals became known as rack prices because tanker trucks would move below a rack apparatus to be filled. Now, as you may have noticed, we moved from 2 futures contracts to 7 spot markets to more than 350 rack locations. Each step of the way, buyers and sellers are looking to a benchmark price, which is a published price. We can see refiners are using the published price to offer their product. That's the posting. And then we have the list of who else uses rack prices. We have large end users, and of course, marketers, which are jobbers or distributors. And of course, government agencies as well can bid on fuel through this similar process. DTN provides benchmark prices through our FastRacks product. DTN also provides published spot prices, the markets that I spend most of my time in. And DTN is also a reseller of futures prices. So we fulfill all your benchmarking pricing needs at DTN. Now, amid all the known factors, we just said there's all these published prices out there. Now you have all these known factors, which can and do change on a dime. A pricing manager attempts to control the company's inventory, ensure the company is meeting its customer obligations, and in the process, looking to make a profit in a segment of the industry where competition can be fierce and profit margins are thin. So I list out several different items that a pricing manager must consider at all moments. First of all, he would certainly be familiar with his competition. He must know where his inventory levels are. Does he have too much supply that he needs to maybe offer a bit of a discount to ease that, or is he low on supply and maybe needs to lift his offer price? Does he have shipments coming in, which obviously is going to affect the inventory levels? Which direction is the market moving in? And of course, energy news, transportation issues, all these may impact prices. You're going to also be concerned with your macro inventory report and analysis. Typically the Wednesday report from the EIA, which is delayed this week, by the way, till tomorrow. But that is something that the market watches closely, and you can see sharp reactions to that report. Pricing manager is certainly going to be aware of that information. And then, of course, let's not forget weather, which can affect both the demand for your product and also maybe challenge logistics. But ultimately, it's the market that determines prices. And here we have our wheel of price influence to offer an illustrative in which to consider the extensive litany of factors that can impact price. So we mentioned a couple here with inventory, logistics, supply, you have the economic cycle. I mean, there's a ton of influences. And of course, right now we have a market, I could tell you, the markets right now are very confused because there is a major tug of war going on. Today, we have a big sell-off, and that is because the individuals thinking of the macroeconomic scene is going to weaken are in control today. So we'll see what happens over the next month or so, but that's where we're at right now. Now we'll turn to understanding what basis risk is. In addition, this is in addition to absolute price risk. Absolute price risk is when prices are either increasing or decreasing opposite of your position. Basis risk are when the futures and physical markets are not in sync. And this typically has something to do with a timing disparity, such as when product may be delivered on a pipeline or when a marine vessel might be offloading. There's also be a difference in product specifications. Like we said, the futures contracts are fungible, and they're delivered in the New York Harbor market, but other markets have different fuel specifications. In the New York Harbor market is an RBOB specification. We have CBOB in other locations. And there's also various levels of Reid vapor pressure levels, which start coming into play. Now we've already had some markets that roll to the higher RVP, and they'll continue to step up, but there's different timing issues. Other markets are still operating at a lower summer RVP. That's going to be changing over the next few days. By September 15th, we'll have stepped up in all markets. And also, of course, different locations, geographical issues will factor into basis risk. And other factors that can influence basis risk are your transportation costs. Just consider if there's a lack of, for a while there, we had a lack of truck drivers, and that was causing some issues in some deliveries, and certainly that could affect the cost you're paying to move the fuel or buy the fuel. If you're quite in a part of the country where there is that limitation, and local supply and demand conditions can vary differently than macro, than the larger macro conditions that's influencing the futures contract, which is again why we move from the futures to the spot to the rack pricing. There's also those considerations of cost of money, interest rates, storage costs. I mean, these all factor in. And of course, we are in an environment of rising interest rates. Storage is pretty widely available because of the current backwardation of the market. But we've seen that weaken today, especially. We've seen it weaken pretty substantially. And of course, gasoline is going to pretty soon move into a contango market structure. Just to be clear, backwardation is when current prices, for delivery now are higher than later delivered prices. And obviously, contango is the opposite, where prices move higher over time. That's the cost to carry, which refers to these various costs of storage and cost of money and opportunity lost. And then of course you have the handling. Oh, I wrote costs there. Should be costs and other margins. The editor made a typing mistake there. Okay. And so now we just mentioned several different risks, and of course anybody in the business knows there are more, and you've probably experienced some of them. But there's different ways to hedge this risk. And we've had different various programs. So I mean, I think probably one of the most common one is the fixed price, which is somebody looking to guarantee physical supply. They are likely seeing, have a view that the market, the prices are going to be moving higher, and they don't want to get caught in that higher with paying higher prices for their supply. So they look for a fixed contract. And of course, you can see there's other variations of it, where you have a maximum price, and this is to try to prevent, getting caught with a price spike, or you could even go with a maximum minimum price. These can happen at the futures level. You could also negotiate with suppliers. Buyers and suppliers can negotiate these programs. And here are a few more that we have listed. So there are certainly a number of ways to mitigate risk. These programs can cost you margin or even lead to steep losses if your view of the market conditions are wrong, though, or should some unexpected event occur that works against your position in commodities. So there's always risk. But some of these programs can certainly ease your way, kind of acting as a kind of insurance. And here's a simple way that a fixed price program can be established. You could use, in fact, if you take our FastRacks historical database of our rack postings, you can perform this exercise and develop your price quotes. And this is the way, you're looking at that difference between the futures contract, or you could even look at this difference between the spot price and the rack price, and find that what that difference is, average that out, and develop develop price quotes. You could also use this practice in buying to make sure you're not overpaying and that you're getting good value in such a deal. Or you could even just take this practice and perform it in an effort to see how you're performing historically. Are you doing better or worse than where you were? And so what I want to shift here now is to some spot to rack arbitrage relationships. Spot prices drive the change at the rack. So if you're in the fuel business, you'll need to understand this relationship, of course. There is real basis risk between the spot and rack markets, and the volatility this year has been extraordinary. Firstly, what spot markets influences your rack? First of all, I said this wrong. Firstly, what you need to consider is what spot market influences your rack, and there may be more than one. DTN updates 10 pages by pad and fuel type of dozens of spot to rack relationships as a guide. And I show 2 of them here. So you can look, we have the rack contract average against the appropriate spot market and also the futures market to give you a plus or minus different return, spread difference there. But I wanted to take a little bit more, wanted to drill it down a little bit to get a better idea of just the table format. So what I did here was create a chart showing this Chicago spot price relationship with the Milwaukee rack market. This is a look at gasoline. So we have Chicago CBOB against the Milwaukee City rack average. What we're looking to do here is just get an idea of how the rack market is responding to change at the spot level. Now, the top stack shows the contract average for gasoline in Milwaukee. Your interest should focus on the difference between the two shown in the lower stack. It's been a challenging year in 2022. So let me see if I can get my pointer out here. I was going to be hesitant to use this because I seem that, but I'm going to use, well, if we take a look, if you look over in the middle of your screen around this, let me find the pointer. Let me find that pointer. I don't know where the pointer went to. Okay. All right, I'm going to probably mess something up, so I don't want to touch anything and knock myself off the call here. But if you look at the big bump in the middle of the lower stack, right around your November, December, early January period, we saw the Milwaukee rack price was well above the Chicago CBOB price, and this Chicago CBOB, that price is reflecting is movement on your Badger and West Shore pipelines, which go from northern Illinois into Wisconsin, right? So we saw that the rack price was much higher at the beginning of the year, and that had a lot to do with the Omicron virus, or variant, I should say, of COVID earlier this year that really affected driving demand. As we move down, again, looking at the bottom stack, we could see where it turned negative for right into like late February into early March. That coincides with the price pressure from the futures markets that spiked in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you could see this how deep that came, how deep that trough was for the rack average in Milwaukee. What I also do is I lay out some moving averages to kind of get an idea of your time, and this is something, it's a little different than what I indicated as far as doing your averaging for looking at the difference, but it's along those lines. So I simply use I have 5, 20, 90, and 200 day moving averages to kind of get an idea of how the rack number is compared against the spot level. You could see it's narrowed greatly over the 5-day period, and this is because of what we're seeing, a downtrend in RBOB futures, which is affecting the Chicago spot market. This is even lower, even despite the Widened Refinery outage. We've had today, I said earlier, we have a pretty big sell-off in the futures market today. RBOB is, fell to its lowest trade since January this afternoon, and we're starting to see. We're seeing that reflected in the narrowing of the discount against the rack, against the spot value. And we could even see it popped up like 3 cents yesterday. That was due to a weakening of the basis in the Chicago spot market after BP said that their largest crude unit, the Widened Refinery, was up and returning to normal operations, and they expected the whole refinery to return to normal operations this week, or short, I should say, in the coming days, to use their words. That was an uncertainty. The Widened Refinery is the largest in the Midwest, and can have certainly a major influence on supply for the region. And I wanted to take it another way and look at the going another direction. This is also a Chicago spot price, but instead of moving, on the Wisconsin pipelines, this is moving on the Wolverine pipeline, which goes from northern Indiana towards Michigan and helps supply the Michigan area. And here we had a bit of a different response, in which the rack premium in Detroit was strengthening against the spot value, even though we saw some pretty strong basis moves in the spot market for ULSD in response to the Whiting outage. But this was a market, the rack market was able to get ahead of the outage, price that in, and we can see certainly some different spreads there. And here's another way, I have the moving averages below, and you can certainly see that, the 5-day moving average, and I always try to take my price charts as late as possible. So this goes through yesterday. It's almost at a 30-cent premium to the spot market over the past 5 days through yesterday, compared with a 90 or 200-day average closer to the 13-cent spread. So those were two of the examples I wanted to show. And I can tell you that I meant to kind of skip this over with basis risk, but I wanted to also indicate that this is very important in trying to understand how disruption could really affect your market. As we saw, the Detroit ULSD market was able to capture, to get ahead of this move. When it came to the Russian invasion, though, even the ULSD market, you can see right in that late March, early April period, where the rack market was much below the spot market, and that's when you had about a month of the war going on, a lot of uncertainty, and the ULSD contract was headed towards expiration, where I think it was more than $1 premium by the expiring April contract against the May contract, and that was quite significant. It's really hard to manage any sort of risk in such an extreme environment, and that was clear your definition of a short squeeze. So those things are sometimes just really challenging to guard against. And I'll give you another example. Just yesterday, and I'm not sure where we're at today yet. But gasoline basis in those Los Angeles and San Francisco spot markets spiked by more than $1 per gallon. I'm talking about the basis alone, which obviously pushes up the spot price. And that was due. We have low inventories in the United States overall, in California, and especially on the East Coast. Globally, inventory is building, but the situation in California is low inventories, and the refinery output has been low. And recently, you have this combination of a short market colliding with refinery issues amid a constant threat of rolling blackouts in California, as record-breaking heat is just straining the power grid and affecting refineries there. So and that heat wave is continuing. So California spot markets are certainly off to the races this week. Now, in this market, I mean, it's these. I'm explaining some various events, but they seem to happen rather frequently. If you think about it, like once a year is frequent to me. Even if something happens twice once every 2 years, it's still pretty frequent, because we're talking some big moves. Record-breaking heat causing rolling blackouts. I mean, that's certainly something that's affecting refinery production. You're certainly not something you would want to anticipate, but you would need to if you're in those markets. And of course, you could also look back to the cyber attack in the Colonial Pipeline and all the disruptions that caused, or Hurricane Harvey going back to 2017. So there are many various factors that can affect basis from various moments of time, and this will all feed into your spot market, your futures market, your spot markets, and also into your rack postings. So a great amount of risk. This is why you need pricing benchmarks. You need FastRacks. You need this information to help you position and prosper in the market. Well, those were my prepared comments, And I do look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks, Brian. We do have a handful of questions here. And if you haven't typed one in and you do have one, please submit it in the Q&A window on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. But first, Brian, if I can't buy in the spot market, why should I care about the spot prices?
Okay. Sure, you get that, if you're, first of all, in order to buy spot market, sometimes you need to buy a lot of volume sometimes. So like if you're moving on the Colonial Pipeline, the minimum move is 25,000 barrels. So, okay, I get it. And it may not also deliver, well, it's probably not going to deliver right to your store. If you're a C-store, it's going to deliver to a terminal, obviously, right? But the reason why you should care is because the spot market will direct where rack postings are going. You have rack postings are the pricing takes effect 6 p.m. And it's going to be based off of what took place in the spot market earlier that day. Of course, you could see multiple moves in the rack prices during the day based on volatile markets. That volatility is being expressed through the spot markets. So you need to understand that. You need to understand, if there is some sort of disruption to your market, how do you position yourself? So that is why you need to know about what's going on in the spot market.
Okay, thank you. Second question, can I use the futures market as a benchmark when buying at the rack instead of a spot price?
Well, you can certainly, you should look at futures markets as well, as spot prices. But and as we even showed the table where we did the comparison between several cities rack posting, rack price that is, against the futures contract. But the problem is you're going to miss out on some of the nuances in your local or regional market. If there is some sort of disruption affecting your market, it's regionalized. It's likely not going to be reflected in the futures market unless your market happens to be in New York Harbor. So you're going to miss out on something, and you could miss price. You could overpay or sell at a cheaper price than maybe you would have if you would have known where the spot market was. So you could do. I wouldn't recommend it. I think you're just leaving too much money on the table.
Perfect. And then one last question here, it looks like. What is the biggest factor influencing the oil market now?
Yes, I kind of breached it a little bit. So we are in a big sell-off right now, and this is especially for crude and gasoline. There's been a number of factors influencing. Of course, we mentioned the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the threatened shut off of some Russian oil to the global markets. So we've had that backdrop, and that had pushed prices up and pushed them over $100 earlier this year, and they were staying there for quite a while. But now what we're contending with is concern of a global economic slowdown. We've already, over summer we talked about, what you call a GDP recession in the United States, but globally there's a lot of weakness taking place. That's driven greatly by a slowdown in China. China is just this huge consumer of oil, as we know, of all commodities, and they have deployed a zero COVID policy, and they've shut down cities. They did it in April and May into June, and they've done it sporadically. And again, this week they shut down another city of, I think it was 21 million people. This is obviously when you are shutting in people. First of all, they're not burning fuel, they're not moving places, but also it hurts your economic performance. So what we're seeing now, we've just had this, there's been this debate, overall low supply globally. We have less refinery capacity than we did a few years ago, than before the COVID. So we've had this tightness in the market, not to mention, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we've had these components that have been sort of supporting the price, but now what you're seeing is that's been chipped away on this idea that, hey, things aren't looking so well. China growth is going to be real slow, and it looks like it's going to take could take the whole global economy down. Plus, of all the problems in Europe, not only are they dealing with a war on the continent, the largest one in 8 decades, but they're also have an energy crisis over there where they're literally rationing supply. They've number of large industrial companies, such as your steel makers, aluminum makers, glass makers, fertilizer plants, have been forced to shut down or curtail activity because of a shortage of energy over there. So that it's very much expected that the European Union is going to fall into recession. So these concerns, when you're in recession, you're using less energy, and that is what is driving the price down right now. That's the biggest influence we're seeing right now.
Okay, thank you. There was a question around if we are going to be sending out the rebroadcast link. Yes, we absolutely will. There will be an email that gets sent out in the next day or two that'll have the rebroadcast link, as well as instructions on how you can request your custom rack report. So be on the lookout for that. And I don't think there are any other questions, Brian. So thanks everyone for joining, and that concludes our webinar.
Thank you, everybody.